So we are having a discussion today about autism and you. So looking more at the adult experience of autism, the experience of people that are of all genders, looking at different representations, some ways to identify this. We're gonna run the gamut today, and just know that I'm simply scratching the surface. But I will go ahead and just introduce myself, and then we will begin jumping in. So my name is Rachel. I also go by Rainier. Name change is happening, so either or is fine. I am a licensed mental health counselor based out of Florida. I've been working in conjunction with Pineapple Support for what I feel like is closing in on 3 years, although I'm not the best historian, so forgive me. I specialize in borderline personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder, all types of PTSD, the autism spectrum, and of course the adult industry, kink, polyamory, anything kind of in these realms, and a mix of all of the above. I am autistic myself, so I like to think I have a good balance of personal and professional. So I'm going to be sharing with you a couple of anecdotes, but most everything is pulled from research itself. So hopefully a nice balance. So we'll get started. All right. So here is the older way that people looked at the autistic experience. You can see a lot of delineated lines. There's a lot of little bubbles here. There's not a lot of spectrum overlay. It's very distinct things. This is the way that many people still look at autism in the medical model. You may experience this with doctors, some psychologists, therapists, neurologists, anyone in developmental psychology. It's got a really strong claw in how people look at autism. Not to say that all of this is not true, but how it's shown visually and explained is not always 100% accurate. So we're going to be breaking down the parts of the autistic experience, language, masking, gender experiences, how it's involved in sex work. Like I said, we'll go all over the board. So as you see here, we're getting really specific into all of these pieces. This is the old functioning model. If you hear people say high functioning, low functioning, it's changed since then to the support model, level 1, 2, and 3. But even folks in the autistic community are finding that that just doesn't fit. Many of us have support needs that are high in one experience, lower in the other, and that can change day to day. So sometimes, anytime we're categorizing someone very strongly in, this is a low functioning person with, level 2 support needs, not really letting it be an individualistic experience. You could see here also language is looked at the same, minimally verbal, some language fluent, usually nonverbal is on here. And yet people can travel up and down these concentric circles on a day-to-day basis. Then we get into intelligence. That's a whole other topic we could get into, is IQs. We won't go there today. A more accurate picture. I find, honestly, that a lot of the excellent information about the autistic experience comes from autistic artists, creators, and therapists themselves. So I think this image can be very helpful because we were looking at it as linear for a very long time, and some people still are. And yet what's really more accurate is these things. Like this is very individualized. If you were to give someone their own thing to color in, they might feel like their social skills are right on target, but the sensory issues could be really, really high or troublesome. So we're trying to phase out these functioning labels because it tends to go more into, are we basing someone's worth off of, are they verbal? Do they make eye contact? Do they have palatable behavior to a wider audience? And you'll see that throughout. That's what we're trying to break down, is that people don't really need to be palatable as long as we're kind and doing what we need to do. If someone's not making eye contact or not smiling or saying, hi, how are you? Or in fact, really asking, how are you? Because the experience is not the same throughout. So we're going to really try to pick that apart and try to undo that way of thinking, which is very human. So if this is the way that you were taught or the way that you've expressed your experience or the experience of others, there's no shame here. It's just learning. Okay, so looking at the main categories, which we kind of saw in that first image and also in the second image, what makes up a, quote, diagnosis or experience of autism? It's going to be a mashup of these categories. So communication deficits, which I like to look at as differences, which you'll see in the later slide. What is the kind of verbal speaking experience? Have there ever been any troubles? Doesn't have to be constant. The ability to maintain relationships with others and also begin and end relationships with others. Meeting expectations of what other people feel like they need you to do or say. Restricted and or repetitive behaviors, which we'll get into that. Special interest, potential rigidity regarding routines and scheduling, and sensory needs. Autism is a neurodevelopmental experience. So I think it's always important to remember that, because many times people that don't understand maybe being unkind to people on the spectrum are thinking that it's like simply not that it would be simple any which way, simply a mental disorder, and that it's some sort of choice, to have these certain behaviors that other people might not find to be okay. So like I said, we're going to try to work on chipping away and building our comfort with ourselves, maybe with others, depending on what brought us here to this webinar today. Okay, so what does a communication difference look like? Again, you might be here to learn more about people in your life, yourself. You may be questioning. So joking. Choking is a big problem sometimes. Part of me suspects that when people are using the tone indicators online, if you've ever seen someone do /S/J when they're indicating that the aforementioned statement was sarcastic or joking, part of me wonders, I haven't researched into it, but part of me wonders that the autistic community had something to do with it. So I'll just share a personal experience. Someone was ribbing me last night in this group that I'm in, and I, for the life of me, could not understand that that's what they were doing. They weren't letting up on this kind of running joke that they had. And I was just sitting there like, oh my God, like you're not a nice person. Like, what's happening? I got upset, my feelings got hurt. And I had to ask somebody else, like, can you look at this for me? Can you figure out what's happening here? Like, this is a huge joke, clearly. And I'm like, oh, not clearly to me. So if you ever find yourself feeling very confused by people making jokes, dry humor, flat humor, doesn't even have to be, especially when you have nothing to go off of. Of course, many of us are do have strengths in picking up on body language, whereas some of us don't. It's very individualized for people on the spectrum. But many times you'll find that parsing out, is someone joking? This can also come across with flirting as well. Kind of a running joke that people in my community, we can't pick up on it, or we interpret any like sort of indication as maybe they're interested. I don't know what to do. Again, not linear here, but a wide variety of experiences. Tone cues, that kind of goes along with joking. Many people that I've worked with know, including myself, take things literally. Not every autistic person is going to do this, but many times this is part of the experience. That if something is written as it is, that's what we'll take it as. In fact, when we're assessing for autism, there are a handful of questions in the assessment that ask, what is your response, or how do you feel about things like that person got under my skin, or they're the apple of my eye. And many people will say, I don't know what that means. I don't care to understand what that means. Or that sounds strange and it doesn't make sense. I don't know what you're trying to say to me. So tone cues, when we're using idioms, colloquialisms, things that are more specific to smaller communities, could be challenging. Body language, picking up on what it is that you're seeing from someone else. Early testing with children that are suspected to be on the spectrum often shows, in fact, I missed a good opportunity to share one of those pictures. Maybe I'll find it towards the end. It's pictures of different people making different facial expression, and there is technically a right answer to it. When tested with people on the spectrum, you'll get a lot of I don't knows or other experiences. Like if someone looks mad, someone may see shame or confusion or something else. It may not be as clear, which is, we'll get into masking a bit, which is why many times people in the autistic community will actually mimic and mirror people that are quite expressive, because there's no question. And we know what it's like to question people's body language. We don't want anyone to question ours. So sometimes in the masking experience, you get really big movements and expressions. So expressive body language of oneself can be very different. I talk about this a lot with my clients. We joke about it. What we think we're communicating to someone else is often not what is being received. So expressive and receptive communication is what makes the world go round. When there's a block, that's when there's a communication breakdown. For instance, smiling. Someone will say, oh, this is me smiling. Like right now, I think I'm kind of smiling. When I look at my video, I know that doesn't really look like anything. That could actually even look unapproachable or neutral to somebody. Laughing, joking, looking curious can look very flat coming from people on the spectrum. We think that we're expressing what something looks like, we're channeling it through us, and other people, honestly, at least in my experience, I get feedback of like, when I'm not masking, like you don't look like you're having any reaction. So when I'm not masking at all, it looks like RBF. People in my life know, okay, they're listening. They're not like being mean or spacing out. I actually can listen and understand better when I'm able to unmask, which we'll get to the effects of masking. And then one-on-one and group behavior. Many times people on the spectrum, like they end up working or playing alone. Playing, I'm referencing more in childhood. or imaginative play with others may be a bit strange or confusing to try to enter into someone else's imaginative world. And this is sometimes where we get the isolated child, the quiet child that's not being understood by other parties. But that doesn't mean that people on the spectrum want to be alone. I know so many extroverted autistic people. So what they've had to do versus what they want to do can be very different. Okay, looking at repetitive behavior. What does that actually look like in practice? There's not been excellent media representation. I think we are getting there with some kind of shows of people and their experiences, but media in the past, at least past 10 years has been something left to be desired. So many of us may think of, when we think of repetitive behavior, just someone flapping their hands. And there are thousands of repetitive behaviors that could actually occur. Some of them might look more innocuous, where some of them might be more in your face. Just depends on the person and the time. Repeated routines is a big one. For instance, like if somebody says, every night I do this at this certain time, or I have a really strict schedule, there's comfort in that. There's safety in that. It removes more questions. So I find that many people in the autistic community find comfort in this, just knowing, okay, I have the things that I know I do and I can do them. And that gives that kind of dopamine experience of, okay, I've been able to do my things successfully in the way that I want to. This can also apply to food patterns. Comfort meals, comfort foods. Repetitive eating of the same thing at the same day, same time. Or having a limited palette of foods. Many times this has to do with another piece of the puzzle, which is it could be a sensory or texture issue. It could be the GI issues in autism is very interesting. We won't go down that rabbit hole, but if you're interested, I would look it up because it's kind of both sides. It's sometimes the restrictive eating patterns can add to GI issues, but also the autistic experience can also lead to that too. So, if you're eating fries every day or whatever for dinner, probably not going to have the best gut biome going on, which can of course lead to those GI issues. But then, it's kind of this cycle that goes back and forth. So widening a palate can be very challenging for people. And yet there's also people on the spectrum who the GI part is not a part of their experience, and they'll try new foods and they'll try everything, and the texture minimally matters. That's me. I'm someone who's like, I'll try anything as long as it doesn't have a consistency like sand, I'm pretty good to go. But a lot of my friends are like, nope, I'll be eating the same 3 things. And even myself, as much as my palate is wide and open, I'm still eating oatmeal every morning at the same time, and I won't let anyone change that. So, see what I mean? Differences in individuals. Echolalia. If someone's unmasked in front of you, or if you have in front of yourself, a lot of times you will get repeated verbal statements, sounds, or songs. Some examples are somebody playing the same song for hours, 20 times straight, and still getting the same exact joy out of it. Repeating animal sounds, repeating sounds that sound good to the person, repeating movie quotes, repeating something funny. This is part of the autistic joy experience, as I call it, which is just, stimming is a way to self-regulate. Echolalia is also called verbal stimming. And that we're just, if someone's repeating the same thing over and over and over again, because it makes their brain smile, or it gives them a laugh, or they just like how it sounds. That's a good kind of example of that. Like for me, there's certain like movie quotes and things. Like I know recently I've been stuck on something from a wrestling show that I'm watching, and I just keep repeating the song. And I live in a house with someone with ADHD who also, because of that experience, verbal stim. So we just bounce back, bounce back and forth off of each other. Then there's other stimming styles. Some people really like visuals. They want to watch things kind of bouncing around. If you've ever seen those little happy baby dancing fruit videos, that's a good one. Watching beautiful visuals, moving colors, moving shapes. People also have, there's many touch things, like here's one of my little toys. I like this because it just, I can never really tangle it. So I can just keep moving without any blockages. So touch stimming, some people will hand flap, some people will do one of these, some people may just tap. It can be big, it can be small, it can change day to day. Many people have multiple types of stimming. Hearing also too, that can be a part of the auditory verbal loop, is the hearing and saying of something. And I feel like I'm missing a sense. Got touch? I mean, taste. I guess that could be. Anyways, we'll move on. There's so much to cover. Okay, now sensory needs. All of this is linked up, as you can see. There's no chain that goes unlinked. Hypo and hypersensitivity. Now, hyposensitivity is as it sounds. People may need things to be really loud, really intense, really bright. Not all the time, though. So we'll get into kind of the little complexities. Most people have one way or the other they kind of lean to, even if it's just one, you know, it's 51% this way, 49% that way, even if it's just a little bit. But hyposensitivity, these might be people that want the spicy foods, the foods that make their eyes water, their nose run. They may like really kind of bright moving lights. Somebody who's cranking up the radio, the TV, can't seem to process the sound that's coming in. And I'm not discussing anyone with like, you know, hearing loss or deafness or anything like that. This is just simply, because of course that can add another layer to it. Absolutely. But overall, if somebody is hearing and hyposensitive, they want all the sensory things, strong smells, strong touch, weighted items, things like that. So they might need things to help bring them up. Whereas hypersensitivity is usually the very like quiet. I want low, nice sounds, like maybe some brown or white noise. I want soft, soothing touch. I want things to be more quiet. I want nice low lighting. I want to be chill, like almost like you would see in a spa. I just want to be chill. Like I said, most people lean towards one side. I personally lean towards hypo. What I mean by that is I like loud songs, not loud sounds, not random sounds that I don't control. That's a big part of sensitivity, is controlled things. I like listening to loud, fast, like metal music and EDM. I like weighted stuff. I have a weighted blanket right here, honestly, and I have one at night. I have a weighted vest, blanket, all sorts of things. I do like those extreme foods. But when it comes to light, so visuals, I'm hypersensitive. I don't like a lot going on. I have the whatever night mode, flux, all that stuff on my technology. So everything has a yellow or orange hue. I get mad at what I call the big light. You might hear that from some autistic people, like, please don't turn the overhead light on, put on the mood lighting. So it intermingles. Usually most people aren't all one, all the other. And then changes in stimulus response. Sometimes people on the spectrum can go from like, oh, I love this, I'm jamming out, I'm hyposensitive, I'm getting all this nice musical accompaniment, I'm focusing on the different sounds. And then in a matter of minutes, oh my God, please turn that down. No, stop. Or with touch, like, oh, maybe, with dry brushing. Dry brushing is very popular for regulating in autism. Literally, like a boar's head brush, brushing yourself. That can go from very soothing to prickly, irritating, cut it out. And that's why managing sensitivity levels is kind of a lifelong, minute by minute experience for those of us on the spectrum. It's almost never like a complete perfect harmony, though there can be moments. Okay, big number for you. Looks small in the percentage form, looks big when we actually look at the raw number. So an estimated 5.5 million adults in the United States have autism spectrum disorder. This is from the CDC. When we look at this percentage, it just seems like, oh, that's not a big population. Well, first of all, that number is not representative, as most statistics with anything that's hard to pick up on, or that gene sequencing is difficult and not quick. That's what we have. Just know that that number is probably quite larger, especially now. And I always like to address when it comes to statistics and things that if you feel like something is now everyone has it or it's overdiagnosed or oh my gosh, everyone I meet now thinks they're autistic or is autistic, know that a lot of people run in the same communities. So a lot of people that share similar special interest, approaches to people, communication needs are probably going to run together. So if you end up in a pocket of these groups, it's going to look like your whole world is just this certain community. And the more education people have, the more ability that we have to figure out these gender and presentation differences, more people are going to learn and receive a diagnosis or a self-diagnosis. So I always like to throw out that kind of compassion moment that if we feel like, oh my gosh, everyone under the sun has this, that is not the case. These are still, more rarer conditions. Just I would say similarly to gender identity and sexual orientation. When people have more ability to question, challenge, think on, have access to information, see people like themselves, it gets people thinking. Whereas if they have nothing to look at, read at, they're just going to assume, well, this is me. I must just be so different. And that's not anything that we want for people out there. We want people to be seen, heard, and understood. Okay. Gender presentations in autism. I am most certainly not trying to leave out any men. I'm not trying to leave out cis men in particular, but I do like to point very strongly at presentations that are not cis men. That is where most diagnostic criteria is based off of. So there tends to be a little more access to diagnosis, but I'm certainly not trying to insinuate that that experience is just easy and accessible to know about. One of my top favorite, which is a graphic novel here, is Camouflage: The Hidden Lives of Autistic Women. I have also had people like myself that are non-binary, gender non-conforming in some way, find this relatable. People that were raised as maybe someone that they're not, like if they were, quote, socialized as women and girls, regardless of who they actually are. I find get something out of this. So I just, feel free to read kind of this little blurb from the graphic novel. But it talks about essentially these large differences where people will write off a diagnosis for people that are basically not cis men. Like I said, not that that's just an easy diagnosis route, but many times simply just saying, I've heard this so many times, well, you're able to make eye contact, or you don't seem autistic, or, oh, it's got to be Asperger's. That's a lot of stuff we can get into, but definitely saying someone doesn't look or act autistic is really buying into that old medical linear model that people have to have certain behaviors all the time. It doesn't take into account masking, levels of comfort, how someone was raised, their own personality characteristics, introvert, extrovert, their own preferences. I know I'm using myself as an example a lot. I hope it's helpful because I'm trying to draw some of these anecdotes home, but a lot of people have told me that, oh, there's no way. What? If they know me in a professional capacity. Because I have a little bit of a mask on. I'm not going to present to you guys and go, okay, so let's check out this graphic novel. Yeah. Okay. What do you think about that? Like, if I did that, you would be like, okay, you don't want to be here. So I understand that. And I make, a choice to put on a little bit of a mask because unfortunately, that's how the world goes around. So we'll get to that topic soon enough. And yet when I'm home alone, mask off, I'm just repeating things over and over again. I'm not really in particular having any conversations. I can often go nonverbal. I use AAC devices, which essentially communicate on my behalf via me typing. So really it's text to voice, nothing too fancy. Because I don't have anything to, I don't really have an audience except for, my loved ones, which they don't care. So I think looking at some of these gender presentations, the big takeaways is if someone was raised to be a woman or girl or anything in that realm, that there's going to be some characteristics that if someone was looking at an old school diagnostic checklist, they would say, oh, you don't have it. Because many times people socialized as women and girls are taught to make eye contact, be pleasant, smile, be very attuned to other people's body language, a lot of forced learning and forced discomfort, which of course most people that are on the spectrum have, but there's a very specific bent to that. And we could, I'm sure, maybe some other time go into why that's expected and how that, impacts people's development. But I always like to point that out, that it's okay if there's pieces of the autism puzzle that you've been told have to be part of the experience to be valid. It's just not the case. And we'll get into, hopefully I remember, I've packed quite a bit into this presentation, what we call little spiky graphs. And you'll see when I get to that makes no sense right now. I'll explain what that means. Okay. Now I kind of already covered some of this. So adult and non-cis men diagnostic rate, very poor. Symptoms change and morph throughout the lifespan as well. Most people, if they were a child now and they had, let's say, parents who were aware of some of the different presentations and were brought to a compassionate, neurodivergent friendly psychologist, therapist, neuropsychologist. As a child, they may have gotten a diagnosis. But some years ago, it was really a very strict checklist. And providers are often looking at the autistic population as a group to pity. So I'm not going to try to rip apart the medical complex right now, but many times people that were getting into this type of work, the ABA work, the working with people on the spectrum, we're not doing it kindly. And there is a very long and strong history of very severe abuse towards autistic individuals. Many of the people, before there was any sort of control and dignity, which is still improving, these were people that were hospitalized for life, institutionalized. See, now everything's coming to me. I'm like, oh, I could add all the things into the presentation. For instance, that a lot of people used to think autism was a type of psychosis because there is these small pieces that overlap, but are very much very different. So a lot of abuse, misunderstanding, and neglect of people to be able to be themselves. We've come a long way. We're still not quite there yet, but we're getting there. Masking. Most people, when they're going to go to the doctor, therapist, psychologist, because they consider that interacting with a professional, just like you would show up at school or work, they're going to have a mask on. And that's not any fault of their own. It will make it harder to diagnose. But of course, as people become adults and know that they feel like they have to mask or are forced to mask, we're going to have a poorer diagnostic rate. Then there's misdiagnosis. Many times people are, it's like, oh, you're just ADHD. Oh, you have social anxiety disorder. Some of these can be true. There's most certainly dual and multiple diagnoses. One of my favorite terms is ADHD. So capital A and then UD and then capital HD. So people with ADHD and autism. And then a piece of that being misdiagnosis. So maybe getting diagnoses that are accurate, but completely missing out on that autism could be a part of the person's experience simply because of overlap, lazy testing, lack of appropriate questions. This is where self-advocacy can be really helpful. Big fan of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, ASEN, so if you're interested, definitely check them out. And StimPunks too. They've got some really great information. I'll be pulling from something that has come directly from them as we get into some of the ways that autistic people communicate and exist. We already discussed eye contact and the kind of be polite expectations. These are more so with the non-cis men. Okay, this I just gave you some memes, to be quite honest, because sometimes that's the best way I can explain something. So here we have autistic masking. Now let's see who you really are under the mask. Same autistic person, but you're less comfortable. This is something, like I said, that we have got to in the society work on breaking down, that autistic people are not mean, antisocial, asocial, psychopathic, sociopathic, a lot of these words that are thrown around and either are not clinical words or not accurate at all, simply because when autistic people are masking, they may not do things that are considered social niceties, not because we and they aren't nice, but because these are things that aren't exactly necessary. So when someone's masking, they're not going to do unnecessary, or excuse me, they are going to do things that are not, quote, necessary in their mind, but feel necessary to the neurotypical world. Like you see in this other meme. Don't forget your mask. And the other mask. Hello, nice to see you. I love to make small talk and eye contact. Most people don't. I'm not saying that there aren't some people on the spectrum that, have an issue with this, but it really is a neurological piece. Like many of these things are not occurring to people to do because they don't see the necessity. And I would argue technically there's not any. We could be kind, loving people and not ask how the weather is, or not care about little tiny bits and pieces, but actually wanting to go into deep conversation about that, someone's interest or life experiences, as opposed to the little avoidant surface level niceties. And eye contact, although may make some people feel comfortable, for someone to actually be attuned and listen. I think that if someone is listening at their best and their eyes are closed, or they're looking down, or they're looking off, it may not seem engaging, but that's part of the training ourselves out of these neurotypical expectations for communication. Because it may seem like it enhances things, but I promise you, us folks on the spectrum, we're empathetic, we care, we have a lot of things we'd love to talk to people about, and most of it is not the social niceties, guesswork of basic day-to-day expected communication. I talk a lot to my clients about, okay, let's break down what social rule, we've erred against here, and let's try to figure out why is that in place, and how can we navigate that in the future? Because there's a lot of unknown social rules, at least to people on the spectrum, probably to everyone to some degree. That's why we like saying I can't speak for everyone, but many of us like nice, literal, clear communication, as opposed to things that you'd have to intuit, mind read, which I personally believe has become far too normalized and not helped anyone's mental health, no matter of autistic status or not. When we're clear, kind, mean what we say what we mean, that's when we're able to set boundaries, limits, communicate effectively and well. And there's so much more to say about masking. So, some little pieces that I want to discuss here is it's a double-edged sword, guys. Like, I have to do it to fit in, and also no one will ever know who I really am. Even if that can be enticing, especially if we have trauma histories, like I just want to kind of keep it to myself and no one will ever get to know me and whatever. At the end of the day, I think most all of us simply want to be regarded positively and kindly. We want to be heard and seen. And when I mean seen, I don't just mean being looked at. I mean, someone understands us from top to bottom and reduces judgment, or is just generally open to hearing one out. So this can be very psychologically harmful and painful to feel forced. So if you feel like all day long I have to look pleasant, look welcoming, inviting, I have to be attuned, I can't miss any cues, it's hard to just exist and be. This very much intermingles with like CPTSD as well. A lot of folks with CPTSD or both experiences will say, like, I can't make any friends. I just can't. And part of it is, well, we're not letting anyone see us for who we are, but also it's a bit faultless because society expects certain behaviors and mannerisms, especially when it comes to being held in high regard, trying to get a promotion, trying to be seen as a helpful coworker, a helpful community member. There's a lot of harsh bias. There's many studies on the bias towards, even when someone's masking, there's a harsher bias against autistic masking people than another neurotypical person, because there's just certain cues and indications that people judge very strongly because they don't think it's appropriate socially. And as you can imagine, this back and forth, mask on, mask off, like an entertainer, like a performer, which many of you may be in the industry. So we've got another kind of double mask, can very much increase anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. If you're just feeling unknown all the time, that's going to be very difficult. I just realized the time. I'm very passionate about this topic, so maybe I want to pick up my pace. Okay, And I know, guys, I'm just scratching the surface here. If you ever want more information, I have plenty of resources. I'll put my infos at the end. Here's the spiky graphs that I just wanted to show you. What this shows is that many people on the spectrum have really, really high success rates in some working areas and maybe more poor success rates, whereas your average person might be kind of average, okay, pretty okay at all this, whereas some people, as you see here, the working memory of this autistic individual, not going too well, but then the visual skills, visual spatial, incredible, and back to processing speed, perhaps a little bit slower. That's part of the neurological piece, is that we have to remember that this isn't like anxiety or depression. Like, this is a neurodevelopmental experience. So there are things that people can't just life hack their way out of. By God, though we try. So there are plenty of ways to succeed and make improvements in these aspects, but at the end of the day, there are going to be some things that are perhaps a bit more challenging. So, neurodivergent love languages. This is from STIMpunks, S-T-I-M, punks, P-U-N-K-S.org, an excellent grassroots by neurodivergent, for neurodivergent folks, covering a lot. There's a lot of great research, information. I mean, it really is an incredible website. So again, just scratching the surface here. But some ways why I bring this up is because some people can start recognizing that this autism may be a part of their experience when they look at some of these things, because this is a good picture of how people are communicating with others. Whereas the love languages, I'm not saying that love languages are neurotypical, like the day-to-day ones that we might all know from Gary, good old Gary over there, of, physical touch, acts of service, gifts, words of affirmation, and then, oh, I think I missed something. Yeah, I missed one of them. Forgive me. I'm thinking about the neurodivergent love languages, but those love languages that we talk about, you will see plenty of that with people on the spectrum, but there's usually hyper specific ways that these things are communicated. So we've got info dumping. This is a, hey, I love this topic. I love this thing. Maybe you love this topic. Not always. Sometimes we info dump on people that are like, oh, no, I didn't want to know about any of that. This is a lot of information you're giving me here. Info dumping, I think of it like a big box full of tons and tons of books. And you're just like, boop, here you go. I want to share with you the excitement, the information, the learning experience that I had, and let's chat. Let's info dump back and forth with each other. This comes from, I look at all these things as autistic joy. Like, I see something in you and I want to share this with you. You might be interested. Where it can get tough is if somebody shows that they're interested, but is not as interested as an info dump. Like, maybe they're like, oh yeah, I'm a big fan of that. And then you're like, oh really? Well, let me tell you everything that's ever happened since 1982 about this topic. Then there's parallel play. This is a favorite one. This is a favorite one in my house. Existing in a shared area, not really interacting. This may be two people reading, one person gaming, one person working, one person writing. Nice, fairly quiet activities, but it feels like, I found the last love language, quality time. Quality time. Support swapping or body doubling. A lot of people that I work with as clients do talk about this. They're like, okay, work is very stressful. Can you be on the phone with me? Almost like a parallel play situation. Can you be on the phone with me? We may not be talking, could be dead air, but it's almost like an accountability partner. I'm here for you. You're here for me. We got this. We're going to get through this work day, this meeting, this work hour. Penguin pebbling. If you've ever seen what penguins do, it's literally like, hey, I found this rock, this feather, this unique little toy at the store. Here you go. Now I work for myself now, but when I used to work in a larger office, everyone knew I was pebbling. I would leave little stickers, little gifts, a little mint, a treat, a feather. No name, no note, just there it is. If you mention it, cool. If you don't, cool. Most people would say, Rachel, was this you? Yeah. Another way to show I care about you. I note your interest. I just want you to know I see you. Here it is. We don't really have to get into it. There it is. And then this one always cracks me up that this is part of the name. Crush my soul back into my body. As you guys can see, this isn't inherently, these names aren't like evidence-based and tweaked perfectly by, the Library of Medicine. But we're getting there in terms of research on these things. But essentially that just means deep pressure. Snuggle me, pile onto me, put 1,000 blankets on me, let me be in a squishable, squishmallow pile, and that's my life. Weighted blankets, weighted vest. I like to think of it like I'm putting on a thunder jacket, like a dog. When I put on my vest, people know I need some space. Like I got my jacket on. Okay, I think we're getting close. Let me see. Okay, yeah, we're pretty close. Like I said, scratching the surface. I could go into any one of these topics. So much more. Identity first language is actually more recognizable and appreciated by people that are autistic. And as you can see, even I'm doing person first, people that are autistic. That's how I was taught in grad school. When I talk about myself, I call myself an autistic person. So that's identity first language. So if you're doing person with, person who lives with, person who experiences, etc., where you're essentially separating the name, the word person from what they live with, that's called person first language. So a person living with autism, a person doing this, a person doing that. Whereas identity first language is like Black person, gay person, autistic person, things like that. So autistic people tend to really like just being called, someone with autism or an autistic individual. Because there's part of this rhetoric, again, not for everyone. There's some people that would not want to be referred to that way, which is why we ask. We just ask. There's a belief in the autistic community that we can't, just like someone couldn't separate their skin tone or their ethnic background, you can't remove autism from your experience. So a lot of people think like, well, if you're trying to remove that by person with autism or who lives with autism, it's not like I live with cancer or live with something like that's a little more treatable, so to say, or anything like that. Hopefully that made sense. I know that could be a little like, so trying not to pull the identity from the person's being. Like person who lives as Black. If we said that, you might be like, what are you talking about? Like that just doesn't make sense. Exactly. Like you can't pull that away from the person. However, I will say there's a very easily harmful language, which I put the here, the autistic. We don't, that, no. I think we can understand why we wouldn't say the blank, as if there's some sort of it or non-human being elsewhere. And then any dismissive references, like, oh, that autistic kid, or, oh, anything like that, that's more about tone, I would say. And then stuff that hopefully we know now to not use the R slur, R-E, you get the rest, you know what I'm talking about. Even sometimes spastic, schizo has been used for people with autism because of the the long history of institutionalization and misunderstanding of experiences. Let's just know that these wouldn't be categorized as identity or person first. They're just not cool pieces of language to use. They're outdated, no longer used in any sort of diagnostic criteria, and just generally don't feel good. They've been co-opted to be not very kind. So, okay. I know I'm leaving the best till last. What am I doing here? I'll try to speed this up because I know I've got literally minutes. A lot of people share that when it comes to autism and sex work, that it works remarkably for them. Not everyone. Again, some people might find that the things that they have to manage and do to be very overstimulating, challenging, people stuff, interacting with humans, hard. But I've also met quite a number of people that find their way into this, adult industry community, and they feel like it works for them because they are empathetic. And that's a huge thing that we need to know about autistic people, is that many of us almost are so empathetic it hurts, and then sometimes we back off and maybe it looks different. There can be masking and unmasking options. Your ability to build a clientele based on your needs, that they get you, they understand you, they know you, they don't expect you to perform emotionally, but maybe in some other way. Fairly clear needs and preferences of your clientele. Like if you work in a certain type of, maybe you do certain kink or fetish work, you know what people are coming to you about, and there's less muddy waters. Sometimes the fleeting ability to share oneself in a prescribed way, unique connections, sex work, obviously, I've had many people say that it has expanded their boundaries, their ability to communicate with others, know their own needs and wants. So when we do things in such a prescribed, unique environment, that can teach us a lot about ourselves. The environment can typically be structured. I would say that could be more so with CAM folks, where it's your place, your needs, you have what you want around you, what you're comfortable using, and part of the routine and repetitive expectations. A lot of people say, okay, I know the same person comes to me, every week they want to do a private show, but I can be a little creative. Like I'm going to mix it up. I know at the end of the day, the type of sex work I'm going to be doing, but I can make it fun. I can make it holiday oriented, but here's kind of what I can do. And just breaking down those stigmas about autism and sex. These are not accurate, that people don't want relationships, intimacy, sex. Of course, there are some people that are aromantic, asexual, that's separate from the autistic experience. And then there's some people who are like go, spontaneous desire. So I know we're kind of ending on an interesting note. Again, this is such a big topic. I encourage you all to delve more. If you have any questions for me specifically, this is my email here up top. If you want to get in contact with therapy or support from Pineapple, you can reach out to them any way for your comfort, but here's that specific email. And other than that, it has definitely been my pleasure. Thanks for bearing with me, jumping around, getting excited. This is a well-beloved topic to me that I could probably info dump about. So thank you all for your time and your busy days. I hope you got something out of it. Other than that, please take care of yourself, and I will see you next time.